We're live.
Thank you, and welcome to this special meeting of the New York State Commission on Ethics and Lobbying in Government on the 10th day of April. We are here to do a debrief of the public hearing that we had last week, as I recall, last week? On March 29th, from March 29th, a week before last. And we wanted to do this right after the meeting, but for time reasons and a commitment to the open meetings law, both the spirit and the letter of that law, we are doing this debrief now in public. So we're going to start with commission staff to walk us through what they heard and any suggestions about how we might manage some of the issues that were raised. We'll then hear commissioners in response to that, also with their own sort of suggestions and recommendations about how to proceed. So let's start then with staff and Sandy.
Yeah, let me just say as a preliminary matter, the meeting is being held pursuant to Executive Law Section 94. 4G and Article 7 of the Public Officers Law, the Open Meetings Law. Our offices, both in Albany and at the State Conference Center in Manhattan, have been made open to the public, as is Commissioner Carney's office in Syracuse. And we do have a quorum for the meeting. Let me say what staff has been asked to do is to offer preliminary observations about the comments and suggestions and recommendations that we heard at, as Chair said, at the public hearing, Commission's first public hearing, which was held on March 29th at New York Law School. And the way we're going to present is to have members of the executive staff of the agency have taken responsibility for just leading the discussion of staff with respect to particular witnesses and or those who submitted written commentary in connection with the hearing. And the first executive team member is Carol Quinn, who is director of our lobbying division. Is going to lead the discussion with respect to the comments from SAE, SSAE, and from NYPIRG, Blair Horner, who submitted testimony. Carol?
Can you hear me okay? Loud enough?
Yes, thanks.
Yep. Okay, so the Empire State Society of Association Executives is the first commenter we're going to, or speaker who gave comment. Their general comments related to the ethics for lobbyists and clients training. They commented that associations and other organizations registered to lobby they want to provide authority for associations and organizations registered to lobby to manage the process of training, certifying, and registering its members throughout their tenure on the association's governing board. They want things like a train the trainer program so that perhaps they could train everyone in one setting. They would like to manage internal compliance and remove right now, individuals who take this training have to certify individually that they, in a test that they took it. They would prefer, and others, Pitta Bishop, I think also mentioned this, they would prefer that perhaps the entity itself would manage the compliance of all the individuals that are associated with that organization or entity to be able to attest for the group. This comment from ESSAE was echoed, like I said, by a few others. So I'm just going to take a minute to address this one, maybe in more detail than others, just because I think it'll help with other comments that we hear. So this is not something that I didn't know about. We've certainly been hearing from people who have had trouble attesting to their training. But just to give you a little background, ECRA added in clients to the training requirement. But the Lobbying Act already had, and we already had established a training requirement for lobbyists. So, and that is specific. It's in statute that it's every 3 years, for example. So that's a statutory requirement. There are some comments of changing the time period. We would need a legislative change for that. So what we did is since we were given the authority and the direction to administer and develop a training course for clients and lobbyists, we took that, ECRA, and combined it with the Lobbying Act requirements that are specific and developed a new online training that's very easy to access on our website. And then after you take the training, you have to attest in the lobbying application. So there are difficulties with the access. So you have to go through ny.gov, which is an established pathway for all New York State applications to go through, and people are forgetting their passwords. Then when you get into the lobbying, if you get in there, then you get into the lobbying application, and people are having trouble claiming their profile, which basically means claiming their unique identification. And so these are issues that we know about. There are things we're working on to try to make it easier. One thing we plan to do to try to address this is to make the directions perhaps simpler. We have very detailed directions on the website. Perhaps, sometimes you can't win. Sometimes it's I'm wondering if they're too long and people aren't reading them. So we're going to try to develop a one-pager. So here are the 6 main steps to be able to attest for your training, make it easier. If they have more, if they need to get into more detail, they can go into the more detailed instructions. That's one thing that we're thinking of doing. The other thing is there's a chance we'll be able to remove, some commenters don't like that you have to put in your New York State ID number or your last 4 digits of your social security number. There's a chance we don't need that actually anymore. So we're considering whether we could remove that, which might address some of the comments we've heard. And then we're also working with ITS to try to make it easier to claim the correct profile, which again means that if there's 5 John Smiths out there, that the John Smith that matches you is the one you claim, and then that allows you to get the compliance and show that you indeed took the training, and that compliance follows you for every lobbying filing you're connected to. So those are the things that we have tried to, we've heard about this. We're trying to address anything to make it easier for filers to attest to this. And the only other thing I would say is at this point, we do have 76% compliance at the moment. We have 8,910 individuals who are training required, and of that, 76% have completed the training. About 16% are overdue. Of that 24% that's still not compliant yet, 16% are actually overdue. 8% are just within their 60-day window, so they're not overdue yet. They still have time to take it. So, we hear these comments, we're trying to address them, and it's something that we're working on.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Can you please, to me, I don't have, can you tell me the source of the testimonies? I'm sorry. Can you tell me the names of the individuals who you base your recommendations on? For example, I didn't get the first name, S something.
It's the Empire State Society of Association Executives, and the acronym is ESSAE.
Did the person give a name?
Did they give a name?
There's no name on the written
Can you
submission.
forward us that testimony? Can you forward me that testimony so I can read it, please?
I'll send that out to you.
Sure.
He said he will send it.
You'll send it to me.
Send it to you.
And so what are the other testimonies you used to come up with your recommendation?
I was addressing theirs, ESSAE. We heard from Bob Bishop from Pitt Bishop. He gave oral testimony during the public hearing. and it was on the similar topic. So actually, since that meeting, I've called them, and so Megan Matolo and I spoke to Teresa Cosgrove, who works there at Pitt Bishop, and just tried to elicit more information about what their concerns are. And so, you know, we talked to them, and we're trying to keep an open dialogue with anyone who's having issues with, and the bottom line is we're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to attest that they're taking the training. And that's just something that we're, you know, considering all avenues for.
Thank you.
But we are, you know, of course, making sure that they take the training, so that's why the attestation is there.
Thank you.
And we can say we're
Well, it
going to be.
looks like, I'm
working
sorry,
with-
Martin.
Just one moment. We're working with ITS, state ITS, on solutions across the board for our training programs. To some extent, we're leveraging off in the general workforce ethics training. We're looking at leveraging off to the extent we can what has been done so far for the lobbying ethics training. And it will work in the reverse way too, as we develop new ways of confirming, of pushing out the training itself, the online training component, which applies both to lobbying on a 3-year cycle and to workforce general ethics training on a biennial cycle. We're looking at both sides of that and coming up with various solutions. So it's not isolated just to lobbying. We have a lot of work to do.
With regard to lobbying, I saw lots of criticism with regard to the content. So my question to you
Yeah, we'll get into that.
later on.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah,
The
we'll
only other
get
thing I
into
would
the other
add is
comments
that,
broadly, and Carol will address those issues as well. Yeah.
the only other comment I would make is specifically to ESSAE is there's nothing preventing them from getting a group together and taking the online training together, like, you know, having it set up so that everyone is looking at the screen and taking it together if that's what they'd like. But it is an online course, so it's, and it's not hard to find. So, you know, that's all I would say there. So that's all I have on them. I don't know if you want to go to a different speaker.
I just have one question, if I might. This is Fred, related to attesting compliance or attesting to having completed the training. Is that done electronically?
Right. You have to get online. Yes, it's online. So you have to get into the lobbying application to attest to the training. And the reason why we do that is because everyone is in the lobbying application. So on the lobbying application, you'll have the CAOs who have to take it. You'll have the individual lobbyists listed. And so originally, the triggering event for having to take the training to being required is about the submission of a 2023-2024 registration statement. The minute that's submitted, we have it coded, you know, again, we work with ITS very closely. We have it coded so that the first time a person's listed on the first 23-24 registration submitted, they'll get an initial, and it's automated, an initial notification that they're subject to training and here's where you find it. And here are the instructions. They'll get that initial notice. Then they'll get reminder notices because they have 60 days. So they'll get them, and I forget exactly what it is, but it could be 45 days out, 30 days out, 15 days out. And then they'll get, if they're overdue, they'll get overdue reminders after that. And it's all triggered by the lobby application because the people who are required to take the training are the people we want. You know, we want to have the people who are responsible for the filings and responsible for understanding the ethics laws, who are obviously lobbying or being a client of a lobbyist. And so it's all run through the lobby application for that reason.
Yeah, and that's good. No question, no issue with that. I guess I'm asking because wherever the testimony came from about issues with individuals attesting to compliance as opposed to the organization or entity managing the compliance, I would think that we would want to stay with the individual attesting to the compliance, because a lot of things could go wrong, it seems to me, if the organization was attesting to compliance of its particular employees.
Correct. So we had considered that option and we went forward with individuals complying to their own, attesting to their own compliance for that reason that you mentioned, right?
Right.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
Commissioner Cardoza and then Commissioner Harris.
Carol, isn't it correct that if you're the so-called CAO of the organization that's hired a lobbyist and you have to take the training, you have to go into it, but you can quickly click and skip the way it's set up. So you really don't have to, you can finish the whole course in 5 minutes by clicking it and just skipping where you're supposed to go into detail. Am I correct about that?
That's correct. We could, of course, I would hope that people would take the time, since they're responsible for taking the training, to look through it. We would have to, I hear you, and we would have to change it, and given the time constraints that we had in the few people that work on it, to get it launched by January 18th, that's how we did it. But I am, of course, hoping that people will take the time to actually click through the content because they are responsible for knowing it.
But if they do, they can quickly click and not really absorb anything. And I would suggest, understanding the problem right now in terms of timing, that that's an issue that should be looked into.
Let me just add that, yes, we are looking at that, and it applies as well to the workforce ethics training when it comes to the online component. We are looking at methodologies for ensuring that individuals are not only viewing but actually absorbing material and having different test points and stop points that you can't go past without answering a series of questions. To demonstrate that you've made the effort to pay attention to the material.
Right. Commissioner Ayers and then Commissioner Edwards.
Thanks. My question was just going back to the role of the organizations. And forgive me if I'm misunderstanding the way the process works, but it seemed to me that the ESSAE question had to do with sort of reducing the burden on individuals by giving the association a role. And I guess I just wanted to ask a little more about that. It seems like you definitely want the individual to have to certify their own compliance, but that, in the context of lawyer continuing legal education requirements where we have to do training, you can still have an organization that gets you the whole certificate, that sort of tells you what the training requirements are, that provide them to you, so that all you're basically doing is uploading the certificates you've collected at the end of your 2-year registration period. So we're still, as lawyers, we're still verifying, but we're not doing the work of finding the trainings. We're not doing the work of organizing them, of creating the certificates. So we don't really have to touch the system, except when at the very end of it, when we sort of affirm that, yes, this is us. So I'm just wondering, in terms of our system, is there more we could be doing to let organizations that want to provide this service for their members sort of take the weight off of them?
Yeah, I think that's the main point is how can we do that? So we're trying to get the individuals to have the responsibility, like you say, which is why it was set up this way. But we're looking into how to make it easier, of course. And if there's a way to do that, it's something that we look at. This is how we set it up, but that doesn't mean it's the best way to set it up. We can always look into better options. So, I hear that, and we could try to make it even easier. The main problem is people are forgetting their passwords, and then they're not necessarily reading the directions properly, and then they're making mistakes. And so that causes certainly a headache for us as well, because then we're dealing with the questions and the comments. So I'm all for making sure it's more there's certain things I can't help, which is, people have to remember their passwords. I don't know how to help that. But I will look into every avenue, like you mentioned, to see if there's other ways and better ways to do it.
Right, Commissioner Edwards?
Yeah. Thank you. I looked at Rachel Fauci's comments from reInvent Albany, and she made some suggestions regarding to lobbying. Can you tell me why you didn't take her testimony into the recommendations on her testimony into consideration?
We're going to. We're just not up to her comments yet.
I asked which comments earlier she used to justify her recommendations, and she named 2 names, not 3. So my question is, what's the rationale for not doing that third testimony?
We were just treating, because we had a very short period of time to prepare for this session, a divided up responsibility according to speaker and witness. And many individuals did talk about lobbying issues. So we're going to work our way through, and Carol will comment
Okay, so this is
on the
not,
others. So we're going to cover every witness who testified or submitted testimony.
so this is not based on
Themes.
the things, it's based on
Speakers.
Right.
speakers.
There were 2 ways to do it. And the quickest and most efficient way, just to get the issues out on the table so we could talk about next steps and how we're going to go about formulating recommendations, was to divide up the witnesses. But we did consider doing it the other way. This seemed, in terms of the amount of time we had, to be an efficient way to present this.
I just think that maybe at the end, during our discussion about how we resolve, we should probably ask the group agree on how we want to format it to meet our needs.
Sure. Who's next?
All right. Next is, Carol, anything else before we move on?
Not on that speaker, no.
What, Blair Horner, did you do Blair?
I didn't know if we were going with the order of this.
Yeah, Blair Horner.
Oh, you want to go there? Okay.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
All right, so you'd like to go to NIPERG next?
Yes.
Okay, so NIPERG submitted several,
What's the name?
a lot of comments.
Blair Horner.
Blair Horner
Yes.
from the New York Public Interest Research Group, NIPERG, Blair Horner. And I'll go through them. A lot of them are, require legislative change. So I'll just note that. One of their comments, amend the state constitution to establish a code of ethics enforced by an independently appointed commission modeled after the New York State Commission on Judicial Conduct. That requires a statutory change. Perhaps have funding for the commission be a percentage of the net total expense budget of the state or as a fixed amount with an inflation adjustment. Again, that requires a statutory change. Prohibit any elected official from being appointed to the commission. Statutory change. Prohibit outside income for statewide elected officials. Statutory change. Improve the financial disclosure statement filing so that entries are readable and the location of disclosures are easier to find. I don't know if Keith or Michael want to handle that.
Is Michael on?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly
Yeah.
something that we can consider and work on as we develop the FES system.
Again, the financial disclosure statement that so many of us are quite familiar with, that is by statute. It's literally included in the statutory language with respect to the form and the questions that are contained in that financial disclosure statement. So any kind of revision, reordering, clarification, expansion of the questions that are already asked in the FDS statement, any changes to those questions have to be done by the legislature, not us.
And I would also
Okay,
add
next.
that even where we have paper filers, the information is input into the financial disclosure system. So it is accessible in a readable form. There are still some number of filers who prefer to use paper filings. And I think that's the concern that's being addressed here. But right now, that's permissible under the statute. We do enter the information into the system, so you can obtain it if you request, individual requests, the information from the financial disclosure statements.
Okay, next comment, having candidates' filings, not just incumbents. NYPERG would like those to be publicly available on the commission website. Again, Keith or Michael want to comment on that?
I believe that would require
More,
statutory revision.
Communications.
Or Emily?
Well, I mean, right now, that is, has been the practice for the past 2 years was to have the incumbents put on, so I'm not sure what the rationale for not having candidates on there.
Currently,
Michael, did
statute-
you have something?
Yes. Currently, the statute requires us to post publicly the elected officials' FDS within 30 days of their filing, but there's no such requirement for candidates. I'm not sure that we have the authority to do it on our own because there's already the statute requiring the officials up there. So that change, I think, would require legislative action.
So we'd have to put that to that. We have a committee for that, right?
Legislative proposal.
Yes. Other comments on
I
this?
might think that at the least, this is a subject that we can study further, because even though the statute sets a sort of minimum action on our part with respect to the posting of statewide electeds' statements, the statute does not prohibit us from posting even more information. It just establishes the minimum amount of information we need to post on our website, but we can always go beyond the statute to post additional information as long as the statute does not prohibit it otherwise. So we'll look at ways in which we can expand the types of financial disclosure statements that are posted on our website.
And they all are available upon request as well, so if someone requests them, they're provided.
I mean, if it's foilable, we can put it on the website, right? I mean, as long as we're not forbidden to do so by statute.
Correct.
Other comments here?
Okay, I'll continue then. The next comment was to expand the definition of lobbying to include efforts to influence the nomination or confirmation process for positions requiring Senate approval. Obviously, that requires, again, a statutory change. The next would be raise the reporting threshold. So again, another statutory change, but currently it's at $5,000. So you, number one, have to engage in a lobbying activity, which is defined, a defined activity. And the second part is to make it reportable, you have to spend $5,000 doing so. And so I think the not-for-profits are concerned about that because it captures a lot of lobbying activity, which it does. 5,000 is an easy threshold to meet. But again, that would require a statutory change. The next few also require statutory changes, considering legislation to narrowly focus on the impacts on the not-for-profit community. See if there's anything that can be done to make that easier for them. Right now, there's no distinction with an entity. Again, it's if you spend $5,000 and you're lobbying, the same reporting requirements apply to you as anyone else, any other entity. Require lobbyists to disclose their campaign activities consistent with New York City law. Again, that would be a statutory amendment. Requiring lobbying clients and lobbyists to report if they were in support or opposition. So we have a lot of things in the law and a lot of things in our regulation about disclosing what you're lobbying about, who you lobbied, who you targeted, how much money you spent. Currently does not require whether you were spending that money in doing that lobbying in support or in opposition. Okay, and then the next few I can hopefully speak more to. Go ahead. Any questions?
Yeah, one moment.
Why is that particular issue, whether you support or oppose legislation something that's important to report in addition to the lobbying activity?
I would venture to guess it's just an easier, more snapshot picture. Sometimes you can't tell. I think the public might be interested in knowing whether you did that in support or in opposition, maybe at a quick glance. If this was to be implemented, we would probably insert it into the lobby application with a checkbox in support or opposition. So I assume that people were just interested in, okay, you can see someone spent $100,000 on lobbying these targets and these activities, and were they kind of in a nutshell, was it in support or in opposition, or sometimes both? So I suspect it's just more information at a glance to figure out, just more information, more transparency. That would be my answer to that.
Carol, is that information otherwise ascertainable from the information that is supplied? For example, contracts?
Not necessarily. It might, like a contract, like, correct. Some contracts will be specific and it'll say to support efforts to do X, Y, or Z. And you'll be able to tell if you look at the contract and then you look at what they're lobbying on, whether that meets what the lobbyist was hired to do. So I would say some of the time, or oftentimes, you might be able to figure out that the public could figure it out that way. Again, I am assuming, but you wouldn't be able to tell in all circumstances support or opposition. But I do think there is a way to figure it out in many instances using that route.
Is there more from your end, Carol?
Not on that, but I can get into the next comment from NYPIRG.
Sure.
Okay, so these are a bunch of comments that they talk about under the category of revamping and upgrading the lobbying application reporting system and streamlining that. So as a general statement, it's something that we work on all the time. The lobby application, trying to make it more streamlined, and we have done so, made a lot of progress there over the past couple of years. So one of the comments here is to create an auto-populate feature that will allow all state legislators or all New York City council members and their staffs to load. I'm not exactly sure what they mean by that, but there is in the system a way, if you are sending a communication to all the Senate, to all of the Assembly, or to the entire legislature, there's a button and you don't have to click every single person, every single legislature. There's a way you can just click, again, the entire legislature, the entire Assembly. There's also, we have the New York City, you could say all the New York City council members, you could click that button, and then that's the reporting that you would need. There's also a way to, if you're sending a communication, and often lobbyists they'll send a memo of opposition or a memo in support to, for example, the entire Senate majority or minority, or the Assembly minority, or the Assembly majority. And there's a way in the lobby application to just click that button and get that done. I'm not sure what exactly they're talking about. So, part of my job is to call them back. And so I'll probably call NYPIRG and ask for more information on that. To just make sure that if there's something we can do there, we will. But every legislator is in the system and findable, and every New York City council member is in there. The next comment was to remove legislators who have been out of the office for years. So we have a huge list of people you can lobby. We call them parties lobbied. And so and all you have to do is start typing the last name, like Breslin. You type that in and up comes Senator Breslin. You click on that's who I lobbied. But I think what this comment is to remove someone who's no longer in office. And so the reason why we still have them in there is because some lobbying filings, they might get audited, or we might find an issue and they have to go back and amend the previous biennials. So you need to have their name still available. We are actually currently working, however, on an enhancement to the system where we might be able to put dates around, like the former governor, for example, so that in 2023 you could not say you lobbied Governor Cuomo, because that's impossible. So we're working on ways to make that a tighter situation, but I'm not sure. We'll look into it. I'm not sure we can remove all the names for the reasons why I just described. But this is something we're working on. We're aware of. There's hopefully ways we can accomplish what we need to accomplish, but also make it easier for filers. The next one is to list public officials by last name. And right now, again, I will talk to them, but right now you can do that. You just start typing in the last name of whoever the public official is, legislator that you lobbied, and it will come up. But I think this maybe is how it's displayed. So currently how it's displayed, if you're looking in the lobby application or possibly in the PSQ, it's first name first and then last name. So that we're working on whether that's the best way to display who you lobbied, and that's something we can look into. Again, I'll probably follow up and talk to them about that. But the lobby application does allow you just type in their last name and it should pop right up for you. The next is to upgrade the platform in general, make it more stable and reliable. Absolutely, we are always hoping to do that. That is something that we're always working on. The next comment is lobbyist employers and lobby firms should be able to train their own staff and certify that all their staff has gone through the training. We talked about that earlier when I talked about the first comment, and that is something we could consider. Again, right now we have it so that the individuals individually certify in the lobby application that they took the training, but this is a comment that we've heard a couple different times. It's something we can consider. The next one is make the ethics training recertification every 4 years, coinciding with the same cycle as the 2-year registration process. The timing of how often the lobbyist and clients take their training right now in statute, at least in the Lobbying Act, is every 3 years. And so I think it would be great to have it, and it's something that it makes sense to me, put it that way, to have this training every 2 years to match the biennial reporting period. That would make sense to me. But unfortunately, right now, the lobbying statute requires training every 3 years. And so, again, it's easier for us to keep the lobbyist and clients together. And since the lobbyists have to be every 3 years, we incorporated clients into the 3-year statutory requirement. But certainly makes sense to me to have a different time frame on it. It's just not something I can do without a legislative change. The other comment is offer live trainings with Q&A sessions. I don't know if that's about ethics necessarily or just about lobbying in general, but I completely agree. I usually do trainings once or twice a year, and it might be to a large audience once, and then the other time it might be I have met with, I've given a training to the ESSAE a few years ago. I'll give a training sometimes to a not-for-profit group that asked for a training. It's something that I definitely do, but it's something that we would actually like to do more of. And with the incoming, hopefully the hirings we're able to make in the education unit, we'll get more trainers involved and we'll be able to do even more trainings. This is something that we're really looking to expand upon with the expanded staffing. And even with, and Emily has some ideas about making lobbying information more accessible, like social media and other newsletters and things. And so I think this is something that I'm very interested in doing, more trainings myself, also more trainings by our agency. I think it's a great idea. And I'd love to have a more interaction, Q&A with people. And so, like I said, I just reached out to Peter Bishop. I'll probably reach out to NYPIRG. I'm always interested in having more of a dialogue and getting ideas from the regulated community, the good government groups, whoever. It's something that we're looking to do all the time. Those are the comments I have from NYPIRG. So that's the end of NYPIRG's comments. I don't know if anyone has a question.
Commissioner Whittingham?
Thank you. Just a comment. I think it's here in their report, report, as well as others. There were suggestions to look at New York City Ethics Board and how they do things to let the application be more seamless. Have we looked at that? Have we contacted them, getting the idea of what it is that they're doing to see if we may want to model our system in that fashion? It's more than one commenter who basically made that point that New York City pretty much has it down pat somewhat, and we don't. So if they have a way of doing it and they've managed to streamline their reporting system, have we at least contacted them? Are we in dialogue with them? Do we learn anything from them?
I'm not currently in dialogue with them. So we have done a comparison, and I'm not at liberty to speak the comparison right now, but it's something we definitely look at. I would say that the lobbying regulations, which the application administers for the most part, we, starting in 2019 and again in 2021, when we made the regulations, we amended the regulations again, we made the requirements very specific. The statutory requirements, we fleshed those out, we made them specific, right? And we did that because we wanted more transparency. So there is a lot of information that we require within our application by the lobbying community to put in there for very good reason, in my opinion, to make everything transparent. So we don't allow, for example, what used to be, I lobbied the assembly. No, we want to know you lobbied Assembly's person so-and-so in this specific assembly committee, and this person. And then specifically, what did you lobby on? Not just some general topic, but, specific requirements for that. So we have made, we're always looking to streamline. So my overall answer is absolutely, we look into everything, and I will look into New York City and see what works better there, and maybe if we could implement it. But I do think that part of the issue is that we do require a lot of specifics, but it's for very good reason. And so, it's a balance.
So does that mean that you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's less our system that is not working properly and more that we require more information? So our system is not cumbersome, we just require more information, and that's where the difficulty comes in?
There's no one answer to that. So I'm not trying to imply that because our regulations require a lot of information, that's the only problem. I understand that. We work on the lobby application to make it as streamlined as possible. For example, we have inputted every legislator's name, and this is over the course of the past couple years. Well, like I said, since 2019 when the regulations became effective. So since 2019 to now, we have also, we've streamlined the application in many ways, and I'll give you a couple examples. The lobbying expenses are now categorized. You cannot free type them anymore. They're there, there's a list. The filer goes in, they click this, click that, and then it goes into the system. We have information that goes into one bi-monthly report, automatically gets populated to the next one, and then the filer can click on that and say, yep, we're still lobbying on that topic, or no, we're not, we leave it out. We've done a lot of things to streamline the application. We are by no means done. And so absolutely there's ways that we're working on. Terminations, which that'll come up in another person's comment. That's something that's our next highest priority. I will say that there's a very small group of people here at COLIG and at ITS working on a lot of things. So we are absolutely working on streamlining the application. It's one of my highest priorities, and will continue to do so.
Okay. I just have one other comment, based on what was suggested earlier. And I guess you said we're working on it, but one of the way that we may be able to do it, to have the organization or institutions, train their own lobbyists. So what we do is the CLE board, I don't know if you can review the training that they propose to give to their members, or we provide it, but I know someone else said they wanted more flexibility there. So whatever that is, and then we review it before giving that authorization for them to do the training internally, and then their members individually certified.
Certainly, we can consider that. The difference between the lobbying training and the ethics training, the statewide workforce, is that has to be live or live online, right? And ours is supposed to be online. So I think we can work on ways to, or we could consider ways to make it easier for people to certify individually, and perhaps, it's up for discussion and consideration whether you want an entity to attest to their individuals taking the training. Okay, that's not how it's currently set up. We have it directly at the individuals. So, but as far as like whether you can have this online training and have a group of people take it together, there's nothing preventing that. I think the only issue people are having really is attesting to it. So they have trouble getting into the lobby application because individual lobbyists before this never had to. The only people that had to be in the lobby application were the CAOs and the delegated administrators. This is very in the weeds, but there's certain people that have to be in the lobby application to submit the lobbying filings. Individual lobbyists, the people who work for a certain lobbying firm, who actually are the people doing the lobbying, they never had to really be in the lobby application before. Now with the training, we're connecting them, again, for reasons that I explained earlier, to the lobby application. We're making them get in. So for the first time, individual lobbyists, so a lot more people, are trying to get into the system. And so we're trying to make ways to make that easier. So it's easier for them to get in the system, and they can easily say, yes, I took the training on this date. And then that information gets populated into our training compliance reports and all those other things. And then you'll be able to see, if you looked on a filing by an organization that lobbies, you'll be able to see they're either 100% training compliant, everyone there has to take it has taken it, or they're not. There's a couple people that haven't. And those are the type of things that, this is kind of how it works. But if you want to make it easier, there's other things we could consider doing. And I'm open to any suggestion, but I can't have an answer today on how we can do that.
We can refer some of these steps again to the committees that are going to have some jurisdiction and oversight of these subject matters, to come up with a process that then we recommend to the full board that we can take a vote on. Commissioner Edwards, did you have?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the program itself. And I'm looking at two things. There's been a lot of comments throughout various testimonies about the lobbying training, the lobbying and the certification process. And I guess I'm wondering, to what extent have we considered, to what extent can we validate that the program we have is a state-of-the-art program? I mean, have we compared this to not only New York City, but other lobbying programs that have merit for it being a state-of-the-art entity? And I guess as a commissioner, I just probably need to be convinced that the program that we're currently using is the best program that we can provide in terms of lobbying certification. That's what it's called. And then there's easy access, which is what I'm hearing how do we allow people to gain easy access to it? But I first want to understand, how do you justify the program when there's so many concerns raised about it? Are you looking at that perspective? It feels like the program works, it just needs to be tweaked, or that we need work to be done. But is it indeed the right program for what our needs are now? I understand you're wanting to expand beyond the general piece. That makes sense to me. I mean, so I don't have a problem with that. But have you looked at the quality of the program itself, and do you plan to?
Let me just say this, just for the sake of the discussion. We have actually now, and I've reported this to the commission, retained the services of an IT consultant, a 30-month period now. So first they're going to finish, they're going to build what we need to have built for the ethics training for the workforce. We've already had ITS work on this, the training application for the lobbyists. Then we're getting a little bit of criticism, I guess you'd say, from those who aren't familiar with using the system in terms of certifying their compliance with the education requirement they now have. So that's one body of criticism. In terms of overall use of the system, there isn't, that I've seen, a whole lot of criticism. Nonetheless, we're constantly working to improve the system, as you say, and we have a consultant who will turn to those issues as soon as they finish building the training system for us, which we hope will happen before this year.
But if I say IT though, and maybe I'm not an IT person, but to me, IT is executing something that exists. It's like, this is what you want, here's your program, we're going to put it online, and here's how you use it in a technological way. That's somebody else's ability. Like I'm saying, I want to look at the program itself, and you come back to say, here's why we say this is the state of the arts, A, B, and C. Here are the sources we've used to get to that point. Now, if to make it exclusive to New York, we say A, B, and C. I don't walk away getting a sense of that's what's being done. And I just wonder if this is the time to do that.
And that is part of what we're planning to do. At the moment, the IT people that we've retained are going to focus on, they've done a tremendous amount of work on this application since it first went up in 2019 to match the new regulations. And as Carol has pointed out, there's an enormous amount of information that we take in and that we make available to the public.
So they might
With
be
the query capabilities.
just working on the content.
I think.
No, not on the content.
Edwards, yeah. Commissioner Edwards is asking if I can,
Please.
okay, attempt us to look at the substance of what we're providing in terms of training, content, et cetera, to see if it meets the highest standards. So are we state of the art? Are we the best of class when it comes to this level of training?
Right, and the answer is that is our goal. Our goal is to be the best in class and to function the highest possible standard. Are we there yet? That has to be a dynamic process, and that's why we've retained an IT consultant who will turn to ensuring that as we go. And part of the process is
the substance. So we get the technology right. How do we know this is the substance?
there are a team of people. It's not just IT. Carol and her team
Right.
are working with the IT people on a continuous basis.
Yeah, we're using ourselves as the source.
No, I understand what you're saying. And yes,
If I can clarify, are you asking about the actual software being used?
No.
No, okay.
About
I'm asking about the content.
The content.
And so if you're telling me that we've gone to X places, they produce X results, they're recognized by X association to be the state of the arts. How do we compare ourselves to that? It's not like we're comparing ourselves to ourselves. And I want to know how we're comparing ourselves to the best in the class.
and that's what we will be doing.
But you're telling me you're doing that through working through IT, and IT is, to me, it's an implementation piece. How do we take the best of the class and make it available line.
No, I understand exactly what you're saying, and what we have to do, we have to look at other things. There are other systems out there, obviously, other states, of course, have lobbying systems, so we'll be looking at other systems. We're looking at organizations that have lots of recommendations. I've seen lots of things, Carol's aware of many other things, innovations that we would like to build into the system. And it's not that IT is going to make those determinations. As you say, they will execute. They can also assist us in doing the comparisons to other systems, what works, what doesn't. So it's not simply that we're just, fiddling with what we have and responding to criticisms. We do want it to be the state-of-the-art system, both in how information is brought in, which is driven, remember, by the statutes that we enforce and the regulations that we've implemented. So the system has to match that. But we also want the data that we have to be as available as possible to the wider public, for those who are interested in reviewing that data.
So we have two sort of macro issues. One is access, state of the art. The other is substance and content, best in class. And those are the two macro goals that we're pursuing. So Commissioner Cardoza and then Vice Chair Austin.
Let me just add to this, that there is an organization, forget the name, that has done surveys of the ethics laws in around the country. And they have flagged for us, at our request, five states, 4 or 5 states that have detailed ethics laws. We're not going to compare ourselves to Idaho necessarily, but I think it's Pennsylvania and a few others. And they've called our attention to those laws. I think what you're saying, and I think we should follow up, is we can't study 50 state laws, but let's take a look at arguably Pennsylvania and see what they do and perhaps follow up with them. And that is one of the things that's on the agenda. Obviously, it can't be done overnight, but I think that's really the point. And I think we have the raw data, and we have to follow up on it.
Okay. Would you send me some of that information? Thank you.
It would seem that the information, the goal that Commissioner Edwards is referring to might be part of the agendas and the oversight for the education and lobbying committees.
Great. All right. Carol, any more? Russ?
No, unless you have other questions, I'm good.
All right. Thank you. Any questions from Albany or Syracuse? All right.
All right, next, Michael Sander, Director of Ethics.
Michael, we can't see you on the monitor, or we can barely see you. Yeah, all right. Okay then.
So I'm going to be discussing the comments submitted by the New York State
Why don't
Board.
we move that chair? We move over.
From the New York State Board of Elections, Nicholas Cartagena was the individual. There are 3 primary comments. I think the first 2 are intended to be in the alternative. The first is and they all relate to ethics training. The first is to grant ethics officers greater flexibility in editing the model training. And the second is for us to design a streamlined training specifically for non-FDS filer employees. So just to address this more generally, I'm sure we're very sympathetic to the issue that ethics officers are facing now, similar to we are, that this greatly expanded training obligation that we're engaged in. And we're always willing to consider steps that can ease the burden on the ethics officers. But that said, about granting the ethics officers flexibility, individual flexibility to through the training. I think the result of that would be many different trainings that we wouldn't have. We wouldn't know exactly what subjects are being covered by each agency. And also, I think that there's value to everyone receiving all the training, because all the state employees are responsible not only for their own conduct, but there's also some obligation to make sure that our colleagues and their coworkers are also abiding by all the ethics rules. But that being said, again, it might be possible to create a more streamlined training that, but I think we would have to consider very carefully, I think, which slides could be left out without leaving a hole or a gap in the training. I'm not sure that there's any aspect of the training that really just doesn't apply to some large class of state employees. But in any event, that is an issue that we've discussed, is creating a streamlined version. And that's something that we're going to explore to see if we can do that.
The risk, Michael, of not appreciating, on my part, the complexities of what the agencies are dealing with when doing this training. Could we discuss, and we don't have to do it now, we can do it in committee, whether we keep the general training as it is, and rather substituting out slides, agencies can add slides as they will.
Agencies can add slides now. They're free to do that. And in that way, they can customize their training to specific agency needs. I think some of the ethics officers are looking to trade slides, essentially, to keep the length of the training down. And I understand where they're coming from, but I'm not sure, we're not prepared to agree on which slides can be removed. But like I said, this is under consideration and we're sympathetic to the concerns expressed. The third comment asked for an amendment to the law to allow for online training in addition to live training. The current version of Executive Law 94 does allow online training specifically. And that's something that we're engaged in currently. So that's already more or less in effect. Unless there are any questions on that, I can move on to WIS.
So I'm going to go back to what I said earlier when I mentioned after Carol's presentation is I agree and I understand where you're coming from when you said that you don't want to leave it to the agency to just do whatever they want. Would you then be open to having, whether it's 2, 5, or 10 slides that 10 is a lot, they're substituting, they must first present it to the commission, present it here to be reviewed to say if this would comply and this is something that basically be providing the same sort of training. So they're able to amend it, edit it, but first it must be approved by the commission.
I'm not that concerned about any additions to the training.
I
think
understand that.
the agency should feel free to amend the trainings to the extent that they feel it's necessary to address agency-specific issues. So I'm always in favor of that, and I don't think that the staff here needs to review those slides because they're specific to the agency, their agency determination.
I think you misunderstood what I just said. So when I reviewed his comments, what I got from it is that he would like to substitute some of ours. You're saying, sure that whatever they're putting in, it doesn't extend the time. So if we have 2 hours now, they're at liberty to add, but does that translate into 2.5 to 3 hours? What I got from him is that he doesn't want that to be the case. So as it is today, they can add, but they cannot substitute. They cannot amend. If we've got 20 slides, they can't amend 5 of those 20. So what I'm saying is if we're open to looking at this and they make a suggestion, because I would go back to him, it seemed like he has something specific. We would like to amend these 5 slides, and here's why. And these are the 5 slides that we propose replacing these with. So at the end of the day, we still only have 20 slides in 2 hours, not 25 slides in 2.5 to 3 hours. That's what I'm saying, that a commission would then have to review to make sure that it's in line with the training that we want to provide.
No, I think I understand your question. So I think our concern would be that, that this could result in each agency potentially withdrawing different slides, substituting them for agency-specific slides. And I think that we would like to have we have to consider whether we, the staff or the commission, would like to have more control over which slides all employees should see. Right. So rather than leave it to the agencies, each individual agency to choose, I understand you're saying that we would review it, but I think that it might be more worthwhile and more effective to determine specifically which slides, if any, don't need to be seen by every single employee. So we have uniformity.
So then we have 20 slides now. The proposal is let's review those. Let's determine if 15 of those 20 need to be mandatory. And then these 5, the individual agency may substitute. Is that what I hear you saying? Because if you're saying, because what I'm saying, I gave up an option and then I heard something else. And I understand and I agree. There are probably some that everyone should review. And if that's the case, is it 15 of the 20? And that's just an example. But if we're not saying it's 15 of the 20, and we're not saying they have autonomy to take out just about any, and then we review it, then what we're saying is we're going to keep the system as is and you can add.
Or we create a streamlined version of our own.
Which is what I'm saying. The 15 will be a streamline of the 20, where it's like mandatory. These you can substitute. We've got 20. You can substitute these 5. These 15 are mandatory. So that would be streamlined in the process.
No, I mean, these are all things that we will be looking at. We do have a statutory minimum. We are, although there's no longer a time limit, used to be a 2-hour course that had to be taken initially, and then a somewhat shorter course in the refreshers that took place on a triannual schedule. But we are responsible for putting together the program. That's whether we provide it or local ethics officers are providing it. And there is, a request out there generally for us to provide more training. And we're looking at modalities for that, which would necessarily be uniform. But there's a bare minimum that we have to instruct, which I think is the point you're making. What are the bare minimum that has to be? Yeah, I think here the commentator is saying some of these things are not necessarily pertinent to every agency. Not every agency has workers who are going to confront certain kinds of issues. But that becomes, we'd have to figure out a method. Not only would we say you don't need this is not part of the essential, let's say 15 or 20 slides, whatever the number is, but that it's not applicable to your workforce. So we'd have to be able to make, I think, that assessment as well.
And that's what I'm saying. We're making that assessment. I'm just saying, I think we're saying the same thing. We're going to make that assessment and we're going to make that determination of what should be mandatory. What must every single employee see, right? As it is right now, you can add to whatever we put out there. It seems to me that the commenter was saying there are some that we may not be applicable to my constituents, our employees in this particular agency. And so we would like some autonomy. And I suggested 2 ways to do that. One, we review it. And I know that there's some things that are mandatory. And the other one, we say this is it, and then we're going to add, but those are mandatory.
Yeah, well, and I think we would have to have guidelines, I think, but this is just out there. We would want to have guidelines for how that determination is made. You can substitute these if your workers don't deal with contractual issues, for example.
Seems to me that would be a good subject for Commissioner Edwards' committee to take up.
I mean, I also, I'm not convinced about the argument that there are some slides that can be optional for some state employees. I mean, I think that's still an issue that needs to be considered.
So as it is today, you're saying all that we provide in meetings.
Yes.
Okay. Time delivery. Okay, so then it sounds to me that our response to the commenter is that, okay, we understand you may believe your employees in this agency don't need these, but we're saying that these are mandatory and they need these. It's applicable to them regardless of what level they're employed at.
Well, I think I'm saying a little bit more than that. I think I'm saying that we recognize the concerns, and we appreciate the comment and the argument behind it. And we're actively considering how to address it. And we have several options before us, none of which have been ruled out. And one is to permit ethics officers to take out slides and substitute them. That's still a possibility. We haven't ruled that out. One is for us to create a streamlined training where we decide which slides get taken out. And I forget what the third is.
But there's it as it is.
We did, well,
That's what, based on, because what you're saying is not different, but when you came back and you said you are not convinced that everything that's there is not necessary.
right.
It sounds to me like you're saying keep it as it is. That's what I hear, unless I am hearing you wrong, but that's what I hear. If you're saying everything that's there needs to be there, it sounds to me like we're saying we don't need to make a change.
Well, but for the sake of time, I'm going to ask that we really do take this up in the Education and Training Committee, because it is a very legitimate issue where I think you're right. That's exactly what we're saying. But we also need to consider these other two things that Michael has put on the table.
That's what I laid out.
Yeah.
Those are things I laid out. So what I want to get is that, and what I think, even though we'll consider it in the training committee, we want to get to the public is that these are the things we're considering, and our response is not that these are necessary and so they're going to stay. But we are taking,
Response,
no,
yeah,
that
it could be.
it could be, but that's not, that's what I was getting. And we're saying these other things are there, including what was proposed, and we're going to review it in that light. So I think that needs to be clear, so that the public can have that as well.
Thank you.
Before you move on, I want to add to that. I think one of the choices one of your options of what we convey to the public is to be self-reflective, a commitment to being self-reflective, to examine the extent to which slides we feel are necessary is indeed necessary. So for example, if it's tied to legislation, it's got to get done. Or is it something that we feel it needs to get done? So I think we really need to do some self-reflection with regard to what we currently offer. And from pain to pain, why are we offering it? Why is it important? What is it tied to?
And it would be good, I think, for commissioners to see that as well. So, I mean, we can go in and take the training, but it also would be helpful for us to be able to support the rationale from mind where the approaches we're taking, which.
See, I think that helps us to step away, again, from being viewed as being so linked to the system. It's like, I think it helps us to be self-reflective and to begin questioning what we do. I think that's the opportunity to be more legitimate in the eyes of the public. If we don't want to convey, that might be the case, we don't want to convey that, we know this is the answer. We've got 10 questions here. We know for sure that this has to be here. So here is what we're looking at to satisfy you. And I just think we need to change that.
I think to summarize this, so we can move on, if I may, I think the idea is that we know that within every training, there is a basic generic type of information that we give to the employees. And I'm not talking from only the perspective of legitimizing what we do to the public, but also making relevance to our employees who are required to view this. that perhaps there's a way we can, with the help of our wonderful staff and with the ethics person at each agency, to make those presentations in addition to the generics, some sort of additional presentation that would be relevant to the staff so that they do the generics, they're not dozing off. So something that would be relevant and helpful to them would be, I think, the idea, what we're looking for.
More discussion to come on this with staff and the committee, and then recommendation. So how we go. Michael Moore?
Yes, I'll now address the comments submitted by Cheryl Hallahan, individual. She says that she would like an amendment to the public officers law to give COLA the authority to regulate the outside activity review process within the agencies. And she says that the current law gives the agencies unchecked discretion over the employees, and they can't challenge a negative response from their agency. I'm opposed to this comment personally. Like we were just talking about, I think agencies have specific concerns of their own, and they can deny approval of an outside activity for reasons based on their own assessment of the ethics responsibilities of their employees, or for other reasons that are not based in ethics, but are reasonable and are founded in the functions and mission of their agency. Furthermore, I think this whole argument gets into the realm of employer-employee relations, human resources. We don't really want to be an appeals body for every employee who is seeking outside activity approval. And she alleges that this unchecked discretion creates potential for questionable or even punitive denials of outside activity requests. That may be true, but I don't think that this body is the best body to assess that, again, because many of these determinations are being made because of agency-specific reasons, and the agencies are in the best position to assess those reasons because they have the expertise on their own subject matter. I would suggest that if some process like this were to go in effect, that the proper body would be some other body, perhaps the governor's office of employee relations. And also, if there are agencies that are producing unfair decisions on outside activity requests, that might be a matter for a different office to investigate. We don't investigate agencies.
In all due respect, Michael, I think the theme that Claudia and Halen have been sounding, you may well be right. I have no basis to disagree with you. But these are issues that legitimately came up with whomever spoke. And I think at the end of this discussion, we have to decide who's going to, the education committee will investigate some of the things, the other committees will, and then they will discuss this with the relevant people who spoke and come to a consensus. I don't think we should have a debate now on those issues. You're flagging an issue, and obviously you and Carol in particular have done an incredible amount of work here. There's more, but we shouldn't have having a debate now on the pros and cons. This is an issue that was raised. That was the whole purpose of the public meeting, and so let's take advantage of it and take a look. Maybe you're right. I'm not at all disagreeing with you, but today is not the time to have the debate. Where it's useful to identify the issues, which we then should internally debate.
Can you tell me the name of the person?
The last name is spelled P-A-H-A-H-A-M.
I didn't get that.
This is a written comment. It should be, it was in the further set. It was in the later set that went out. And it should be understood, when this is taken up in committee, this would be a wide expansion of the commission's involvement in the process. Currently under our regulations, so Part 932, we're looking at outside activity requests from policymakers and statewide electeds.
And that's kind of to Commissioner Cardozo's point.
Yeah.
We can pick this up in committee and discuss it. I do appreciate the staff's perspective though, and kind of get why you would want to get it on the table early. But we shouldn't, I would agree, it should.
No, that's correct. Just on the record to reflect the fact that, now we're talking about much larger group of jurisdictions.
And one of the things that, just in regard to this, not to debate it, but if it's not our responsibility, I know we've mentioned some possibilities that we should be able to make a strong recommendation than the other on which one of the entities or both of them should have that responsibility. But, all right, or Michael, or?
I think that's it for Michael. Anita's on vacation, so I'm going to take a couple. So, Invent Albany, Rachel Foss, if you recall, was the first to testify. She also submitted written comments, including the following. The first is to increase transparency and access to public information through use of open data. This would apply in her proposal to financial disclosure reports and lobbying information. And one suggestion she's made is that data be put on the open data website that's called for by a 2013 gubernatorial executive order called State's Open Data Executive Order. Currently, the lobbying database is available publicly, so anyone can log into it and conduct an inquiry. And I know Carol's group is in the process, maybe they've already done it, of making the data generally available on the web. Am I right about that, Carol?
So, well, the public, I think you're referring, number one, to the public search query where you can find anything. But OpenNY database, we are in the final stretch, very, very close to getting all of the data, which is more like a data dump, I would call it, on OpenNY. That should be coming very, very soon.
So we're in the process of doing that on the law side currently. With respect to financial disclosure statements, other than elected officials within our jurisdiction, don't put them on the website. As we discussed earlier, Keith mentioned there is the possibility of other FDS information, which anybody can request now by filing a request with the agency. Doesn't necessarily exclude, we really do have to look at statutory restrictions. We're not required to post those on our website for the workforce generally. The policymakers and statutory filers who have to file 30-some thousand individuals who file statements with us. But this is really something we'll be looking at.
The financial. Are we suggesting that all financial?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think that's their proposal, and I know there's some who feel that might be needlessly invasive. On the other hand, the information is available. You have to make a request for it if you want to see it, but it's not. We do redact very limited information when we produce those.
So their request was not limited to, I think, the earlier request where the public officials and candidates, in addition to the incumbent, they had candidates.
Yes.
And I thought that's what one group asked for, and you're saying this, you read it to be wider, broader than that.
I do. I
Okay.
read it as encompassing all financial disclosure information. And that's something, again, that we should be looking at. They're also calling for that we develop clear guidelines regarding disclosing the status of investigations. We do have in our investigative and appellate guidelines in our regulations at 941.16, a series of situations in which where the commission determines or the executive director determines that certain information is in the public interest with respect to the status of investigations. we do make certain information available, but there are criteria and guidelines. Whether we can go beyond that, whether there are statutory restrictions that prevent us from going much beyond that is a question that should be looked at in committee, because we do have restrictions on what we can talk about with respect to investigations that are in process and those that are closed. And that's been continued from one version of Section 94 to the other. They're also recommending that we take a look at the Campaign Legal Center's list of 10 top transparency upgrades. We have looked at those. We'll take another look at them. I think by and large, we are doing virtually everything that is recommended in those guidelines, but we should revisit that. Absolutely. Another recommendation is that commissioners be firewalled from the elected officials or their representatives who appointed them. Staff will be presenting commission with proposed guidelines, both for recusal and for the conduct of meetings that will encompass certain recommendations we're making. And I think those two should be reviewed in committee. We've talked previously about, and Vent Albany acknowledges that whether requests for outside activity approval, they're couching it as all advisory opinion requests regarding agency heads and statewide elected officials, whether those should be decided by staff or should instead be decided by the commission. We've talked about that, and I know that the special committee is in the process of looking at that very issue. They also recommend requiring trauma-informed harassment training for all commissioners and senior staff. Currently, the statute requires that for the head of the investigations and enforcement unit going forward. This is another thing we should be looking at. I will say we've looked at the opportunities for that kind of training. They're somewhat limited. The nature of the certification is very specific, but we can look at whether we can, if the commission decides that's the direction to go in, to provide that across the board for all staff and for all commissioners. In addition, they have a series of recommendations for legislative changes to the state's ethics, lobbying, and election laws to improve transparency. They're calling for more specificity in lobbying reporting, also including whether the lobbyist is being retained to oppose or support a piece of legislation or a section of a budget bill. Requiring reporting routing and nominations subject to Senate confirmations. Others have made that request, and I believe there is a proposal currently in the legislature, in both houses, both chambers of the legislature, calling for that. Requiring lobbyists to report political contributions and fundraising activity. They point to the New York City lobbying regulations, which do require that. Again, that would require a legislative change. Clarify the political parties are covered within the definition of clients. Carol, is that something that would require a statutory change in the definition of client, including political parties?
Or in the regs.
I'd rather think about that. I don't know if it's required for a legislative change, but it might be. I'd have to look at it further.
Currently in the regs. A relaxed reporting requirement for filers who are spending between $5,000 and $10,000. So the threshold, as Carol talked about previously, having to file is spending or anticipating spending $5,000 or more lobbying. They would create an intermediate zone requiring only semi-annual as opposed to bi-monthly reporting if you're anticipating or spending between $5,000 and $10,000. Requiring filers to report employer campaign contributions. There is a Senate proposal now in place requiring, we talked about this a little bit, require electronic filing of disclosure statements, so eliminate paper filing of FDS forms. Require legislators and candidates for the legislature to post their financial disclosure statements on their own campaign websites. There are bills in both the Assembly and the Senate to that effect. Currently, there's no requirement incumbents' financial disclosure statements are posted on our website. Required disclosure statements from candidates for statewide office or the legislature be posted on the website. And we talked about that before. Currently, candidates are not included unless they're incumbents. Amend financial disclosure statements to include disclosure of cryptocurrency holdings. As Keith pointed out, the FDS form is prescribed very specifically by statute. Keith, would that require a legislative change, or is that already implicit? Including
To the extent it may or not, to the extent cryptocurrency may or may not be considered either a cash asset or a security, that sort of controls whether the legislature has to modify the financial disclosure statement to now capture this new financial asset.
It's a phantom of an asset.
So it really depends upon how the financial asset gets described.
It's characterized, but we can't control the nature of the descriptions in the form, correct? Those are statutorily dictated.
We can interpret what the statute requires disclosure of to determine whether a particular asset fits that characterization of the statutory asset needing to be disclosed. So again, it depends on how we read the statute as to whether cryptocurrency, for example, is already included in the statement by virtue of the fact that it's a security or not. If it's not a security, then we'd need some legislative change.
It's some sort of financial instrument, perhaps, and that merits looking at. The next suggestion is that members of regional economic development councils, REDCs, be required disclosure statements. There is a Senate proposal to that effect. And not only require that members of REDCs file such statements, but those statements also be subject to FOIL and the Open Meetings Law. Again, another proposal in the Senate. Require online publication of New York State judges' financial disclosure statements. There is a proposal in the Senate to do that. Typically, that would not be within our province. I don't know if that's something the commission wants to look at, but it has been put on the table by Reinvent Albany. And penalties for violations of additional provisions in Code of Ethics, Section 74, Officers Law. Ethics agencies in the state have made proposals to pass those provisions, specifically 74(3)(f) and H, that don't have financial penalties associated with them, be the subject of legislation that would add financial penalties to those. And the state ethics code to include a duty to report misconduct. That's also a proposal. That's before the Senate. Currently, at least from a statutory perspective, there is not an affirmative duty, although we'll talk about it. Some agencies do impose that requirement through their own regulations or requirements. And then support an amendment to Executive Law Section 94 to expand its qualifications to be a commissioner to include major campaign contributors could not serve on this commission. Those with major financial interests in state business, contractors or vendors could not, and extend this qualification to apply to spouses, domestic partners, and other emancipated children. They support staggered terms for commissioners, which is already in the statute. There's a slight amendment that the executive chamber has proposed. What chamber of the legislature supported it? The Senate, the Assembly did not, but we nonetheless, even without the amendment, there are staggered terms on the commission provided in Section 94. Add accessorial liability for violations of Section 74 of the POL, the lobbying laws, and financial disclosure laws. That would be POL 73-A. That too is a proposal that past ethics commissions have supported and are potentially something that this commission may wish to consider advocating for. And draft a proposal for its own budget as suggested by Commissioner Edwards. So they're supporting that proposal. And also they support, and this is something that I think we should look very closely at, an independent evaluation of the commission's technological staffing and other funding needs of the agency, and to bring in an outside management consultant to look at that. In the past, the agency has not had the budget for that. I think it's an excellent idea, at least for this commission to consider. We'd have to consider how it would be funded to bring in an outside entity to look at how we function, how we've allocated responsibility, and it's adequate in one. I will say that under our expanded staffing plan, once it's implemented, I think we're going to be in excellent shape to do what we need to do, but that doesn't preclude having another set of eyes take a look at that. And that's what we have from reInvent Albany.
Question?
That was all reInvent Albany?
All reInvent.
Yeah.
Questions, comments?
I think it touches on a lot of this, some of the things that we discussed earlier. So since we're leaving them for the committees, I think what we're hearing, there's a lot, and we're probably going to have to put them, just organize them in that manner after the meeting to, delegate to each committee what committee needs to address what, because they're coming under the umbrella, from different commentators, but there are uniform themes that we need to look at.
But just picking up on what I think is an excellent idea, I would suggest that perhaps staff take all these topics, which fit into 3 or 4 categories: training, lobbying, filing, and so forth, and then determine which committee should be looking at that initially, along of course with staff. And I think what we've heard so far, particularly from Carol and Michael, have been very helpful. And then say, okay, these issues are legislative, and as a practical matter, we know that that's not going to happen till next year, because the legislature, as a practical matter, it's about to stop substantive work. But in terms of regulations or changing our habits or our policies, we can get started on that now. It seemed to me our immediate goal should be for each committee to take on some of these issues, have a discussion with staff and the members of the committee, reach out where appropriate to the groups that have made these helpful comments, perhaps even have a meeting with some of those groups. And then each committee would bring to this commission within the next few months their specific recommendations as to the policies that should be dealt with, and then put off until the end of the year what recommendations we're going to make to the legislature, because that's not going to happen. But there's obviously a huge amount to do having nothing to do with that. And, we could spend all day debating these issues now, but I don't think that's very helpful. And I think this would include suggestions that have been made about looking at what New York City does as that other states do. I don't have it on my computer, but I'll send it to you what we've learned so far. And then the other point I want to make is that, as I've been writing reference here, is that one of the people, I think it was Evan Davis, suggested that each commissioner should participate in one or more training programs themselves so that they can both learn and see the reaction as well as learning. I think we would all benefit if we sat through one of those training programs that's online, so we could have a better feel of what's going on. So it seems to me that's what we should do, rather than we could spend the whole day debating each of these issues.
Right. I think he may have gone a little further than just for us to sit in and watch or appear at one of the. I think he wanted us to be present at
Participate.
at some of the meeting agencies, not just together or individually watching it, but having a presence where the training is taking place on site. And I support that. That is something I really think we'll discuss it later on. But that is something that I do support it, as, to get that public confidence and to make sure that we're seen as taking it seriously. And again, I guess you just summarized what I was saying, is to put everything that we're hearing and that staff have taken from these, that we have taken. I guess I am happy you did that. I did something similar where for each of them, I wrote what I learned, but you've done it. So now categorize it, and then for each of the committee, we'll just delegate, who gets what, and take attention.
Really important overlay of what's legislative and what's not, what we can tackle without legislation, make that a priority and pursue it with some vigor over the next several months.
Yeah, let me just mention, there are a number of other witnesses we can run through very quickly. There is some overlap and some additional texture that comes out. For example, Dr. Michael Kanders from Yale State University tells us that he has made ethics complaints at his college. He gets an acknowledgement back in enough. And his question is whether SUNY policy 9001, which creates an affirmative obligation to report misconduct, is being followed at his school. But it raises the larger question, again, of whether that's something we want to look at, whether it's a legislative proposal, which I think more likely it is than not, or something that we want to look at by way of regulation. So it's not an inconsequential point that's been raised by others. We've got a couple more. Keith, oh, yes.
He's recommending that we appoint CUNY's ethics officer versus CUNY itself.
Oh, that,
What makes that appointment so different from appointment of ethics officers in other agencies?
there was a different individual who's suggesting that he thinks that the head of it, but it's the same. I would agree with you. It's absolutely the same. Ethics officers are employees of respective agencies, and they're hired pursuant to whatever their hiring and appointing practices are. And the suggestion there is maybe the ethics officers within individual agencies should be appointed by a different authority, or the ethics guidance should be provided by a different agency. In a sense, in terms of outside activity, although that commentator is coming with respect to having maybe they're being, you can make the argument, maybe they're being granted prior to when they're granted. So it's both sides of that. Bear in mind that there are hundreds of agencies.
So the other agencies don't have to come to us, but CUNY and SUNY do.
No, it depends on the nature of the individual. If we're talking about outside activity approval requests under Part 932, policymakers and statewide elected officials come to us. But non-policymakers, we're not required. They get their ethics guidance when it comes to outside activity approval. That's all we're talking about. And comes from their ethics officers within the agency. If they fall to the other category, if they are policymakers and they have to come to us first, they have to go to their local ethics officer, and to prove there, then they have to come to us. If it's denied by the local ethics officer, by the agency ethics officer, that's typically the end of the process, and that's that commentator's complaint.
What should we look at?
I think, if I may.
Sure.
I believe, it's from 3 different perspectives, but it appears that they're calling into question the way the ethics officer is appointed for each of these agencies. So I think we could group them under that one umbrella base, even though the comments, they're addressing different things. One's addressing, the outside activities specifically, another is addressing fraud, and then the other person just outright said, they shouldn't be doing this. But it comes under that same umbrella. Who's appointing the ethics officer, and does that need to be changed?
For if I might, sort of broader, what does an ethics process look like at the state agencies? What jurisdiction do we have over that process? And are we exercising that jurisdiction to the fullest so that state employees feel like they're getting anything from the ethics process that's particular to their? Because what's being suggested is there's a lot of subjectivity in how some of the agencies are making decisions around business and employees.
Where would that go? Where would that go?
I think that probably goes to the legal code.
So one other suggestion, I think this was a very constructive discussion, but I would suggest, and I think this is obviously the Communications Committee, should take a look at the process we followed for the public hearing this year, since it was the first year under the statute, and what have we learned as to what next year's public hearing should be in terms of timing, in terms of invitations, follow-up, et cetera. And while it's fresh in our mind, I think we should take a look as to the tweaks that should be done so that next year's hearing would pick up these kinds of thoughts, including, for example, specifically scheduling a follow-up meeting and the various other issues that have come out of our discussion.
I would think back on what you said, it's just a conversation, maybe we can have it now. But I think that one thing I wanted us to address is on some of the administrative complaints that were made and be comfortable with whether we made the right decision or not. One was around, I'm not saying I agree or disagree, I'm talking about the complaint that we held, where we held the site and why and how legitimate it was. Two, right. Some of the complaints I felt in terms of formatting, in hindsight, I look forward to being more engaged. I know it's temperamental and it makes us very vulnerable, but I feel comfortable with the way we ended up interacting with the group at the public hearing. And sometimes silence speaks louder than words, and we were silent on things that we know are not true, or there's some context within which to discuss the situation. Like, for example, we were individually accused of not submitting our financial disclosures on time, so that we were acting in an illegal way. But that could have been easily answered. We submitted on time. We had to submit before we went to any interview. At least I did. And I don't see a problem with having that conversation with people who are not falsely, but who are not putting into context certain situations. It just makes us look more vulnerable by being quiet about it. And as painful as it can be, and as it was for me, some of those people represent the public, whether I like it or not. And yet within, when I read some of the testimonies, there's some questions within it that I still have, that I do have, by people who are pretty abusive to us, And for me, for the moment, it blocked it out. I didn't want to hear anything. And I think as a public servant responsible for this commission, I have a responsibility to look at the fullness of the proposal, even though it's coming with criticism, coming with a whole bunch of criticism that I think was unnecessary. So I just hope that we have a conversation about how we can be more engaged with the public, how we can be more flexible.
And that's what I was suggesting, since you're a member of the Communications Committee. Let's have a meeting discussing this and a whole bunch of other issues relating to it, and then bring our recommendations back. We shouldn't be debating it now.
I agree with that, Michael. Thank you, Chair Bailey. I agree with that, Michael. We're not going to debate all of it, but I think it's important that we raise it in the public meeting. This is a debriefing. We want to make sure the same way we go through the comments and say these issues were raised, let us raise the administrative issues so that the public know that we heard them and that we will address them. We don't necessarily address it here and do the debate, but we need to raise it here. For example, there are other administrative issues that we need to raise, not debate. And I think this is the right place because this meeting was called to debrief. And as such, that's what we're doing, and it becomes necessary. What becomes necessary also is something we should look at. I don't know if we're precluded from it, but there was a big thing about the timing of the meeting. Did we get as much as we need? There's a whole lot that we got and a lot that we need to do from what we got there. As the statute, I recall Mr. St. John earlier said, it doesn't preclude it. If it's not precluded, we might include it. I'm not saying this is what we must do, but we consider, based on the timing, we did get some, but is that enough coming from New York State? Do we want a second meeting 6 months later, towards the end of the year in October? Is that a consideration? We had 5 minutes for each person to speak. They agreed to that. Do we want to next time say, if your testimony is going to be more, then you need to make a request? Is that something that we need to do to address it? So I want us to bring that up publicly so that the public knows that we heard them, and then we go back and we debate it, we consider it, and then we make the recommendation. But in a debriefing meeting, I think it's important to raise the issues.
All those things will be on the agenda for the communications committee.
Awesome.
Vice Jones.
The only thing I would say is we have to be very careful in that some of those who address us may be objects of our investigations and the like, and responding could have ramifications far greater than silence.
Somebody got to bring it to our attention.
I think this is the kind of thing where we need legal advice and counsel. So we can, I think maybe even guidance because I have some thoughts on this, but I think that they have implications for how we do our investigations and how we do our work. That requires some legal advice. So I think this conversation is better held in executive session to get that advice, as opposed to trying to do it.
Yeah, I don't think we're trying to do it now, but I do agree that this needs to be put on the table in the public forum. And like everything else, we bring it to the committee and flesh it out. But it's important that the public knows that we heard that. Because the briefing is public and not in the parking lot.
No, agree. We're here. I mean, we're over 2.5 hours. Nobody briefing, but we're good.
And I can say, we do have on the agenda, we do have on the agenda that item, but we may have already addressed it, however. But Keith, did you want to just quickly run through citizen unions recommendations?
Sandy, I'm sorry, but before you do that, if you wouldn't mind, I have to go teach. I'm sorry to have to leave, but if I could just say really fast, just seconding what's been said before I go, I hope we can schedule a public meeting that's not during the state budget season. Maybe like top 5 worst possible days for most of our regulated constituents, and I think that's really important. I just wanted to say that for the same reason that Commissioner Whittingham was. I think it's important that people hear that. And then 2, I would just hope that when we delegate issues to committees, I think this is the plan, but I'd be grateful to be able to see where things go, because I hope that commissioners can sort of cross-participate in committees if there are issues that we want to get involved with. I hope we're not limited to the ones of which we're a formal member. The example I'm thinking of is the public search query. I'd love to be able to learn more and sit down. I mean, I think it's a great suggestion that people are making. We should all get trained in different parts of what our constituents have to go through. I'd love to work on I've tried to play with the public search query and been pretty flummoxed by what it means and what questions it can answer. So I'd love to have the opportunity to sit down with folks and talk about that and talk about whether there's more to do. But I'm sure that many of my colleagues would feel similarly interested in various issues, and if there's a training to be had, I hope it gets offered to, or an opportunity to sit in on that kind of thing. I hope it gets offered to the whole commission when the committees sit down, so that we can all be better informed. But I just wanted to say that before I left. And thanks so much. And again, so sorry to have to go to teach.
Any other
So in the interest of
comments?
time, I will pick up,
Okay.
pardon?
Okay.
I'm going to reflect the highlights of testimony that was offered by Ben Weinberg, who's Director of Public Policy from Citizens Union of the City of New York. Like other witnesses, NYPIRG in particular, Citizens Union started out their testimony, you may recall, by kind of reminding us that they were somewhat suspect from the outset of this commission and the enactment of the Ethics Commission Reform Act. They were somewhat suspect of the ability of this commission to act independently. In that vein, Citizens Union has offered a number of proposals for the commission's consideration that speak to its independence. First off, Citizen Union, which I will refer to as CU for ease, it recommends that the commission adopt a resolution to prohibit by regulation any ex parte communications between a commission member and those who appoint the commission. Those by statute are called selecting members. The CU would rather that those ex parte communications between any commissioner and his or her or their appointing authority, so to speak, or the representatives be under limited exception, that the rule generally be no ex parte communication with very limited exceptions to that general rule. CU goes on to recommend that the commission re-examine the process of rendering advisory opinions, and that the commission retain authority over the procedure for providing advice to elected officials and other high-ranking officials, both in the executive and legislative branches. CU also supports legislation that would require the due process hearings that the commission undertakes, that those due process hearings be made public, accessible to the public. Continuing on, Citizen Union recommends that the commission develop clear rules to regulate when and in what ways the commission will disclose the existence and progress of an investigation. Citizens Union goes on to recommend that the commission consider setting expeditious timelines for its procedures, as well as supporting legislation that would require clients and lobbyists to report if they've lobbied in support or in opposition to a matter. This particular recommendation sounds familiar because we heard it voiced by NYPIRG earlier this morning during Carol's presentation. Citizens Union also supports another piece of legislation working its way through both houses of the state legislature, requiring registration and the disclosure of information relating to lobbying for the nomination or confirmation of anyone who is subject to confirmation by the state Senate, nominated by the governor. Citizens Union would also recommend that we consider approaches to curb individuals and entities that are doing business or seeking to do business with the state from making sizable campaign contributions to those officials who have some decision-making authority over the business opportunity that that financial contributor is interested in advancing. That sort of encapsulates the variety of recommendations coming from Citizens Union through either their oral or written testimony. I'll go on to highlight the recommendation that was presented to us from the Center.
Let's just if there are any
Center
questions.
for,
Citizens United.
Let's just see if any questions or comments on Citizens United's recommendations.
This is union, that's.
Citizens Union, I'm sorry, Citizens United is somebody else.
That's
Thank you.
underlying theme.
Yeah. Same acronym, different.
Yes. Subconscious at work. All right, thank you. Chief, please go ahead.
All right, so hearing none, I'll move on to the recommendation from the Center for Judicial Accountability, whose director is Elena Sassower. She recommends that letters, so-called closing letters that are issued by the commission, those closing letters should indicate 30 days in which the complainant, whose matter has now been closed by the commission, that the complainant within a 30-day period be entitled to seek reconsideration of the commission's decision to close a matter, similar to what is provided by the appellate division rules pertaining to its attorney grievance committee procedures. Those are the salient recommendations that came from both the Center for Judicial Accountability and Citizens Union.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Sure.
From the Center of Judicial Accountability, I think she also had some concerns about maybe pins or letters and the lack of information. So in addition to given the opportunity for reconsideration, whether or not we should have more information in those letters and whether or not the commissioners did vote on it, or it's only saying that the commissioners voted, and to make that clear. I think I got that from her comments as well, if I'm not mistaken. Those are all the concerns that she had.
And we'll refer all of these to the appropriate committee for discussion and review, and then a report back to the larger body.
Then there's just a few more that I'll run through. Professor Aida Tsai, who's currently at SUNY Farmingdale, previously at Baruch College, is proposing that there be legislation that would require federal candidates to be vetted by the political parties before they put in nomination, whatever position they're running for. As was pointed out here, and that's beyond our jurisdiction. We do, of course, receive financial disclosure statements from both incumbent and non-incumbent candidates for state legislature. And for statewide elected office, the statute does require us promptly to conduct targeted reviews of those candidates and incumbent filings. So we do that at the state level, the statewide level at least. David Brandale testified, among other things. He recommended, and others have made this recommendation, that the commission that staff look at the New York City Lobbying Bureau Clerk's Office conducts its operations and look at its vehicle for entering information, perhaps for accessing information. He did point out they have a terminations button so that when an entity or individual ceases lobbying efforts or lobbying for a particular individual, it's an easier process. As Carol's pointed out, that's something that in fact is on the lobbying division's list of to-dos. And eventually we'll be taking care of that, but we'll be looking at that system. As was pointed out, he did point out his view that commissioners should be mindful of their FDS filing obligations. And he also pointed out that the commission should be responding in a timely fashion to FOIL requests. And that moves the requesters to call the agency responses. We do have a process. We do have records access officers. We do follow our procedures. We do have a new set of FOIL regulations that are in effect now on an emergency basis and will come up in due course for final adoption. At this point, I'm confident that we are staying on top of our obligations. We are responding within 5 days. It will take us approximately to respond to a request if it's complicated or time consuming, and we are getting the responses out in a timely way. So I'm comfortable with that. But again, that's something that we should be looking at. And as we've discussed previously, it can be a resource intensive undertaking to keep up with that. But that's something we need to do and we are doing. One individual, I don't believe she testified, did submit written comments we've talked about. Linda Lemiez, who suggested that the ethics officers at community colleges should not be appointed by the college presidents, but should be the appointment process, or perhaps the ethics guidance process should be handled by a local law school or bar association. In addition, we didn't talk about it. Evan Davis, both testified and provided us with written comments. Among other things, he's a member of the Committee for Reform of the State Constitution. He suggested, and this would require legislative change, that at least a majority of commissioners should be appointed by persons the commission does not regulate. Essentially folks outside of state government, in effect. He too recommends that there be a procedure for communications with appointing authority by commissioners that would bind all commissioners, commission staff, and the appointing authorities. Bar all one-on-one communication about the commission's work with their appointing authority or anyone acting on their behalf. Communication with an appointing authority should be directed to the entire commission. Mr. Davis suggested a complete bar is needed so that no commissioner will ever even appear to be in appendage with their appointing authority. As I said, staff will be offering some recommendations to the commission shortly. He also recommends the commission staff, not the LEC, the Legislative Ethics Commission, should be the entity that inquires of the legislator whenever a filing discloses interests that appear to be conflicting or appear to compromise independent judgment in the public. The fact is that although the initial filings by legislators are made to the LEC, they are then provided to us, and we are under statutory obligation to conduct targeted reviews of those funds. So that does, in effect, happen. We talked earlier about Mr. Davis's recommendation that commissioners participate personally in ethics training by making on-site visits to underscore the importance of ethical compliance to effective state government. And he too recommends that there be an affirmative obligation of state officers to report misconduct. He also suggested that the complaint recorded on the vehicle on the website be more inviting complaints. He seemed to feel that the fact that other alternative agencies are provided perhaps suggests that we're trying to deter the filing of complaints. I will say in defense of the structure of it, that we've tried to be as forthcoming as possible and to, rather than simply dismiss inapplicable complaints, provide guidance to individuals and where their complaints can be heard. So if it's a judicial complaint, it should go to a different committee, and we provide the link. If it's something that should involve a prosecutorial authority, a criminal complaint of some kind, we provide links to various district attorneys' offices and federal agencies and so on. But it is something we should look at.
Because I think and this one particularly caught my eye because, for two reasons. One, he seemed to suggest that listing other agencies, once you click on making a complaint, is a deterrent from people making complaints. And then two, that we should take all complaints and then decide ourselves where they should go if they don't, if we don't have jurisdiction. I actually, and we won't debate it now, like that idea, but we need to understand the staff implications. So, but let's refer to the appropriate committee and then get it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit, it's somewhat complicated because an improper complaint coming to us that, over which we have no jurisdiction, that perhaps could have timely gone to another entity, could create a problem for an individual. But having said that, we do think that the various vehicles we have, which include a tip line, folks can call in. They can call in anonymously. They can send us emails, and they can report on the website. All indicate an openness on the part of the commission to
Which is another responsibility I give to the communications committee, and that is how do we continue to let the public know about opportunities to follow ethics complaint, the various ways it can happen, or that we even exist as an agency. So I think there are lots of people around the state that don't even know the commission's here.
And then the last item I had, and we've kind of discussed it, unless there are questions.
I was just gonna comment on the various agency and coming in and then being off the website, not debating, but making a public comment, is to have, us, it takes less staff time. The person who's maybe the attorney, they are screening it. We have all of those on a single page, and we check it off, and that's our response to the to the complainant that this is the appropriate agency. So they're not necessarily navigating it. That's just something that would probably take less time, but they're not looking at it. And we're saying to them, you are sure which of these 10? We know this is the one, and that's the response, which shouldn't take a lot of time there. There was another comment that Mr. Grandal made. There are several others, but one that I wanted to address here. And I think that he said that a resolution, we went back to July 8th. I am sure nobody here is going to put that they were working on July 8th. So it's not necessary for the payment to be accurate to the commissioners, but for the appearance, if we want to say the first day, whatever the day was that the first commission meeting, then that's accurate on its face there, and that's accurate also. We don't have to.
We said that we did it for the very reason that we wanted it to be appropriate as of the date the commission came into effect. Nobody is
It's a technicality.
It's a technicality. So I'm saying 100% no one is going to do that.
So, and then if anybody has a problem with it, they'll foil us, and they're not going to see anything before our dates.
They're not going to see anything before, but then it doesn't hurt us to say, for example, September 8th, August 15th. It doesn't hurt us to say that the first day that the person either started or that, and if we have a record of that. Does it hurt us?
No. Nor does it hurt us to say it's the first day of the creation of the commission.
It doesn't hurt us, but the public has a perception that we are starting it before we started. That's the only problem.
Yeah.
Sorry, but let's.
We'll pick it up. I hear both points. But we will consider it. Yeah.
Let's consider it. Thank you.
The very last item, and we have discussed it to some extent, was to ask Emily DeSantis, who is our public information officer, among many others. She has Orlena Diaz, who's our deputy director of learning innovation, and Marietta Cadiz, who is our deputy director of administration, for their observations about the dynamics of the hearing process, the notification process, of our efforts to elicit comments and to have witnesses testify, the logistics, the ability of the facility that we did use to meet our needs and to broadcast properly and to invite people in to it, if they have any comments. Emily, Marlena?
Sure, I can go ahead. I'm going to turn this way a little bit so my voice is projecting to the speaker. I will say echoing what Commissioner Ayers had said about the time of year, I think this was a very hard time of year for many of the folks to participate just because it was a couple days before the budget deadline. So looking at a time that is not so close to when lobbyists are out doing their jobs when they're one of our target audiences. The hearing notice went out to our stakeholder groups. It was spread widely to good government groups, state and local bar associations, faith-based groups, all people who are registered in our lobbying app, all financial disclosure filers in the state, and it went out to reporters statewide multiple times. We also posted the notice on our website. It was right on our homepage for anyone to see. Commenters appreciated the ability to testify virtually. I think people who couldn't travel to one of the locations did appreciate the ability to do that. And even though we had some people who had signed up to testify virtually and then weren't able to make it, they all did submit written comments. So I think they appreciated the multiple formats of whether it be in person, virtually, or written, how we take the testimony. Going forward in the future, in terms of publicity, we will have many more avenues to get the word out in terms of our, we'll be starting newsletters, doing social media. We'll have other ways to get the word out in the future to do more publicity once we have those avenues established. Overall, the site I thought worked very well. The people at the law school were wonderful to work with. They were very cooperative. I think the room worked well. Their digital communications team was great and able to work with our team to make sure everything was working well. So I thought that site did work well. And in terms of people getting into the building, we just provided them a list, and I don't think anybody had problems getting in. I will leave it to Marlena and Mariana to add to anything that I just said if they had any further observations.
I have nothing to add.
All right, thank you. Questions?
Questions, comments? Let me just say that first of all, let me thank the staff and then thank the commissioners for making a special effort to come in to our various sites for this discussion. Let me also say and encourage our committees to meet soon and as often as necessary. I realize open meetings law presents challenges for us in that regard because people will have to travel and be in place in a public place, whether here or someplace else. But the committees do need to meet. We've got a lot of work before us, particularly given the public testimony that we have just reviewed. I would ask that we would have a first report out by the committees by the June meeting. So we have the remainder of this month, next month, and by June, at least a report out, if not how the issues have been resolved or addressed, how we're going to, what the process is for resolving or addressing. So that puts a little bit of urgency on us to convene the committees and have the conversations. Again, I understand the challenge of the meetings law, but I don't think we have any alternatives at this point. Commissioner James.
Yeah, I just have a question. When you anticipate that we would have the reports from staff about which subjects should be taken up by the committees? Because that's some of the things, those are some of the things that we will need to quickly address.
We can do that relatively quickly, certainly before the April meeting.
I've already done it for my committee, so you're comfortable with what we selected for the education committee.
And the other thing I would just suggest is that we have conversation with staff that are assigned our committees, and they can assist us as well. Anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second? All those in favor of adjourning this special meeting of the New York State Commission on Ethics and Lobbying in Government, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Let's have it. The meeting's adjourned. You all. Let's do it. Hold on, Michael, hold on one second.
Please stand by as we terminate the live stream.